Every Christmas my family booby-trapped the chimney. I never knew why until one year we finally caught something. That year, my trap didn't work. They never did. A week before Christmas, my family went shopping. We went to a craft store for my sister and me, and then to a hardware store for mom and dad. Walking through the colorful aisles, Mariah Carey's music playing, I got excited when I found a pack of orange pencils. They made me think of the scaffolding around our school one year full of possibilities. Along with the pencils, I bought a bag of rubber bands to hold them together. I imagined building a super awesome catapult that would launch marbles and thumbtacks at any invaders. On Christmas Eve, my sister and I sat at a table and worked on our own traps with the things we picked out. I used my pencils, and my sister, who was a few years younger than me, made something with pipe cleaners and Play-Doh. I remember thinking her trap wouldn't even work. Next to us, Mom worked on her own traps. I always thought adults didn't put much imagination into their creations, but every year, their traps scared me. Mom liked broken light bulbs hanging from ropes, and this year she made 5 or 6 more to nail to the inside of our chimney. She also made heavy wooden planks with lots of old rusty nails and bent knives stuck into them. She always made the same things and stood at her table every year, sawing or hammering with sweat dripping down her face. Dad did his work in the garage. He had a welding torch, a lathe, and lots of other cool tools. His traps were almost always made of rusty metal with super sharp edges. They had squeaky hinges and shaky springs that made even my little fingers tired. When he finally came out of the garage this year, he showed us a weird-looking thing that looked like a cannon with a big air canister attached. It looked like something divers wear on their backs. When you pressed on a plate, a sharp metal spear shot out of the barrel in a loud bang. Dad was really proud when we jumped back when he tested it. Then he spent half an hour getting angry while he tried to put the spear back in. After that, he hid the trap in the fireplace. He dug a hole, and for a second, when he was kneeling there covered in soot, he asked me to grab the gas canister and bring it over. But Mom jumped in and grabbed it before I could. She couldn't really pick it up, so she had to walk it over. Dad was quiet the whole time. That always happened when someone mentioned my older brother, Alex. People would get quiet. Alex would have picked up the gas canister easily. He was always big, even bigger than Dad. He looked like our grandpa, who was a giant at 6'5". My gym teacher always wished I got those genes. My sister and I were more like Dad, big, but not giants. When everything was ready, the rocks and ashes put back in place, the pressure plates and tripwires hidden or disguised as Christmas decorations, the bear traps covered with old clothes and boxes, and Mom's knife-covered planks hidden under fake floors, my sister and I gave our traps to Mom and Dad. They put them carefully in the middle of our ambush. I loved that moment. I don't know why. Maybe it was the feeling of being a team, a family. We were helping. I was still scared of the dark, and my sister could barely use the toilet, but we were helping. Ever since Alex was gone, I really wanted to help. I didn't know him very well, I was too young. But after Alex left, Mom and Dad cried a lot and fought even more. Sometimes, they'd even say they were fighting over nothing. They fought because they were hurt. Even after my sister was born, they couldn't touch Alex's room or even talk about him without getting sad and quiet. So in that moment, standing in the living room and looking at the fireplace, it felt like we were the perfect happy family. After that, it was time for my sister and me to go to bed. We liked our special Christmas beds. They were cozy and special, and Mom would turn on the TV and make it super loud. It didn't matter if we ate too much candy or watched movies we weren't supposed to. As long as we stayed in the basement, it was fine. We had blankets and pillows to make forts, and no one came down to check if we were asleep at a good time. Even though it was exciting, we usually went to sleep before midnight. Our little bodies couldn't stay up too late. Mom and Dad stayed up. I thought that was normal. You don't understand how much your parents give up until you become a parent yourself. I never really understood how hard it was for Dad, who was in his mid-40s at the time, to stand up all night, or for Mom to do the same. All night, they kept each other awake when one of them got tired. That was the year I lost my innocence. Isn't it funny how the best and worst parts of your life often happen at the same time? Maybe it's just like a light bulb effect. I don't know. That night, my sister and I went to the basement, climbed into our fort, and watched The Never-Ending Story. My sister fell asleep 10 minutes into the movie. I stayed up and watched every second. I can still see it all so clearly in my mind. It feels like one of the happiest and purest moments of my life. Falling asleep as the credits rolled, dreaming about flying a dragon over school, that's what it was. The last time I felt like a kid. I think everyone has memories like that, don't they? The moment we stopped being kids. The next thing I remember is waking up in a cold, gray light. My eyes were heavy, and my head felt fuzzy. Something was wrong, and I could feel it. It was quiet and cold, and there was a draft. My sister was nowhere to be seen. It took a second for me to realize the lights were off, the TV was off, and I could only see the basement by the light from the hallway upstairs. That was strange. Mom and Dad always locked the basement door and bolted it from the other side. But tonight, it was wide open, and the world upstairs felt scary to my little eyes. I don't know how to describe it exactly. I woke up, and something was wrong. I sat up and crept out of bed, hoping I'd see a better, happier world coming down those stairs. Mom and Dad, with my sister in their arms, telling me Christmas was here. They were just letting me sleep in. Maybe it even snowed, maybe that's why the light felt so strange, pale and blurry. Man, I wanted a white Christmas so bad. It was all over TV, in movies and magazines. But all it ever did around here at Christmas time was rain a little. Black windows at night, strong winds, puddles reflecting streetlights. The only thing I remember about my grandma is her singing, "Rain, rain, go away, come again another day." Nothing else, no face, just the sound of her singing that old song. Like Alex, she was someone I knew mostly through the sadness she left behind. I climbed the basement stairs on my hands and knees, trying to be quiet. Years of sneaking around to listen to Mom and Dad's arguments had taught me to step carefully on the edges of the stairs where they were strongest. When I spied on them while they were fighting, Mom would be standing somewhere, looking thin and sad, arms crossed, with the smell of cigarettes in the air. I thought about that as I reached the top and sniffed the air, wondering if I could smell smoke coming from somewhere in the house. But instead, I smelled something burned. It smelled a bit like party poppers or old fireworks, not like old cigarettes. And there was something else in there, too. Something mixed with that black, sooty smell. Something metallic, almost sweet. Finally, I looked up over the last step and peered down the hallway. For a long time, there was nothing, and I just stayed there, frozen. But then, to the right, near the kitchen doorway, the cold morning light seemed to move. Someone was in there, for sure, moving around and making shadows. I told myself it could be Mom or Dad, but I still didn't move. Whoever it was, they were silent. Deathly so. Finally, I got the courage to move, but I went in the other direction. I was not even 10 years old, but even a kid has instincts like an animal. Mine were telling me to stay away from anyone who was that quiet. So I crawled towards the living room, letting the old carpet muffle my footsteps. When I looked inside, I couldn't make sense of what I saw. It was like a bomb went off. The couch was torn to pieces. The coffee table was broken. All our Christmas decorations were crushed under broken floorboards and torn carpet. The bear traps stood tall, their teeth locked, their jaws shut. Dad's piston was in 2 pieces. The oxygen canister was stuck in the wall. The barrel was bent and lying on the floor. Seeing our traps destroyed made me feel awful. I hadn't thought about it before, but they were always part of our Christmas decorations. They were a little different, sure, but they were as important to us as anyone else's homemade decorations. Everywhere I looked, I saw little pieces of our life in a broken pile. It broke my little heart because I desperately wanted to fix them, to make the living room look the way it did the night before when we were a happy family. I wondered if maybe Dad's little invention went wrong somehow. He almost burned the house down one year, so it wasn't weird to think that dangerous-looking piston caused all that destruction. All that pressure building up. Still no sign of my family though. It didn't look like anything got them, either. No blood. Back in the hallway, I looked at the light from the kitchen door. It wasn't moving anymore, but I didn't trust the quietness. Something was wrong, all wrong. My best chance was to go upstairs. It was the same plan. I had to get to the front door where the stairs were, and then slowly and carefully climb them on all 4s. I knew those stairs really well and disappeared up them as quietly as possible. My room was empty, so was my sister's. She had a big window, so I got a good look outside. I saw the sun was almost up. The early morning light and thick fog made everything look faded and washed out. Eerie too, like the world was holding its breath. And in a way, it was. My parents' room also looked empty at first glance, and I almost moved on without seeing the strange, heavy shadow under their bed. I'm glad I didn't. I looked a little closer. Something about the light down there told me it wasn't empty like normal. Before my imagination could start making nightmares, my sister's face popped out of the shadows. I almost screamed with happiness, but the look on her face was super serious. Not just scared or worried, but almost sick. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide. It was like she didn't even recognize me. I crept closer and touched her hand. She flinched and went deeper into the darkness. Something was wrong, so I crawled in with her and checked her for injuries, trying not to scare her more. She looked fine, so I put my arms around her and tried to help her calm down. When I finally whispered a question, it felt super loud, even though the only sound was my lips moving. She flinched a little when I spoke, making me feel like I had broken the most important quiet in our lives. But I had to ask. I had to know, where's Mom and Dad? She just shook her head. So I asked again, trying to be even quieter. But it seemed like any noise would scare her. Where are they? She finally answered so I would stop asking. She pulled away from me as she did. She loved me, but she was like an animal with a hiding place, and I was risking ruining it. He took them up there, she said, pointing to the roof. Those 5 words made me shiver. They meant that our parents were dead. I didn't like that thought. It made my skin crawl and the place we were hiding feel too small and uncomfortable. My throat felt hot, like I was going to cry. Was she really saying we were alone? I didn't want that. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted them to come back and hold us tight. Without really knowing why, I refused to believe her. I shook my head and crawled out from under the bed, hoping to go find them. I looked back to see if she followed, but she stayed. She seemed ready to leave me to whatever was going to happen, so she disappeared into the shadows, and I was left with the little comfort of knowing she might be safe. Out of sight, out of mind. Crawling out of my parents' room, I realized I didn't have many options. There was the phone on the landing downstairs, by the front door. I could also run down the lane to the nearest house, maybe a quarter-mile away. Not far usually, but did I really want to run out the front door, hoping whatever walked through all those traps wouldn't see me running in the open? It was better to call for help. Better to reach the phone. I thought about Grandpa, Mom's dad. He was a big, scary guy who always scared us. He was a grumpy old widower who had a habit of telling us things Mom said we shouldn't know, like how it was Grandma's fault we were afraid of the chimney at Christmas. I didn't like him. He smelled like mold and dirt. He was a big giant who told us scary stories about his part-time job in a slaughterhouse that made me want to cry. But right then, I couldn't think of a better person to call. I crept down the stairs as quietly as I went up. I carefully lifted the phone off the receiver like it was going to explode. I didn't know what might make a noise. I didn't know if the table would wobble and make a click when the phone touched it, or if the dial tone would be too loud. When you're trying to be quiet, everything feels dangerous. Every movement, every object, it all could get you caught. One of the reasons I thought of Grandpa was because he was on speed dial. I pressed 3 and listened to the ringtone. I was nervous because it was so quiet, and I waited eagerly for the ringing to stop. The whole time, I couldn't stop looking at the hallway leading to the basement and the kitchen. Sometimes, there would be a muffled creak or groan from inside the house, and it made my skin crawl. I'd never known such a long, scary wait. When it finally stopped, there was no relief. Grandpa didn't answer the phone politely. Old guys usually don't. I didn't expect his voice to be so loud. "Hello, Alice, is that you?" Maybe it was just the atmosphere, but it sounded like the old guy was yelling from the same room I was in. Scared that someone might hear him, I slammed the phone down on the receiver and cringed when the bell inside rang loud. If someone was in the house, they must have heard that. I didn't waste any time. I ran, not crawled, back up the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible but also moving as fast as I could. As I climbed, I wondered if maybe I was overreacting, but no. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of glass breaking and metal clanging, like someone ripped a drawer full of silverware out of the cabinet and threw it against the wall. Whatever was in there was moving way faster than it should have been. I heard heavy footsteps getting closer and closer. They turned the corner, reached the front door and stairs, just as I disappeared over the top step and fell to the floor. The fear I felt was electric. All the paranoia I'd felt before felt thin and weak compared to this, like when you're a kid and you run back to the bathroom scared that something evil is in the shadows, even though deep down you know there's nothing there. But this was a deep, serious fear. I could hear something smashing the phone and table, and I was just standing there. I felt a sharp fear run through me as I crawled as fast as I could on my stomach towards the nearest door, which was my room. My vision went fuzzy, and my stomach felt twisted and upset. It made me want to crawl faster and faster, like a soldier dodging bullets. Once inside, I thought about hiding under my bed like my sister, but that didn't feel safe enough. I wanted something, a door, a wall, anything between me and whatever made that noise. I decided on the closet. It made sense. It was full of old junk I could squeeze between, and it had a little hatch that led to the attic. All of this went through my mind in a second, and I went to the closet door just in time to hear the first step coming up the stairs. Whatever it was heavy. I could hear the wood creak and the railing break and snap as it pushed its way up. I was breathing so hard I was almost whimpering with each breath. I almost lost control of my muscles and my bladder. It felt like a tiny thread was holding me together. My body, my mind, my sanity, all of it waiting for that final thread to break and for it all to fall apart at once. I'd collapse into a pile of tears and stuff while choking on desperate sobs. I don't know how I made it to the closet so quietly. I managed to open the door and crawl inside without making a sound. I watched through the gaps in the door, terrified, waiting for God knows what to happen. Whatever it was out there, on the landing, sniffing the air. I expected it to be an animal by this point. A twisted reindeer, for some reason. Probably because of the season. And the sound of its loud snorts made me think that. But when it finally poked its head through the open doorway to look for me, I saw something that looked disturbingly human. Or at least, it had been. Hard to say. As a family, even now, we don't really talk about it. Not before that day, not after. Not at any of the family reunions where all the different branches of my family get together and talk about ways to deal with the curse. It, whatever it is, seems to do things we expect. Talking about it makes you feel crazy, even with family. I don't know how else to say it. You feel silly. You make the problem seem silly too, like you don't need to take it so seriously. Of course, the curse isn't some random thing. It has a sense of humor? I want to say, it teases us. It's cruel, for sure. It hurts to admit this, but everything it does, all the dead people, and there are lots, because my grandma had a lot of kids and they all had kids too. So many that there were 11 different families at the last reunion, giving it lots of victims to choose from, but all of it, all the pain and sadness, landing on the roof, climbing down the chimney, leaving safely if it's hit by one of our traps. It was a freaking game. It was playing tricks on us, and it always had. And those tricks were part of a game with rules. That's why we had to have a chimney, because if we didn't, it would act unpredictably. And that's why the thing that looked into my closet was wearing a Santa hat and white beard. I hate this, by the way. I hate thinking about how the worst night of my life was a joke to it. But yeah, that's what it was. It wore a Santa hat and beard, and it was honestly pretty scary. Especially to a 10-year-old. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal, either. It looked like a rotting corpse. Something you'd find withered and preserved in the Alaskan tundra that scientists say is a caveman from long ago. It might have been a dead thing, actually. It was leaking a foul gray liquid from its mouth, which had no lips, and its cheap nylon beard was covered in it. I can almost smell it just thinking about it. This monster came and went in a few seconds. It didn't know which room I was in, so it just took a quick look before going to check the other rooms. Part of me thought about yelling to help my sister, but, well, I couldn't move my arms even if I wanted to. Instead, I thought about how it was going to check this room again when it couldn't find me anywhere else. Maybe it found my sister first, but I didn't want to think about that. Instead, I kept imagining it coming back to this room, stomping around, opening drawers, and looking under the bed. And I was sure it would turn its head towards my closet, see the slatted doors, and realize I was hiding there all along. I had to leave that place. I remembered the attic entrance on the top shelf. That was my best chance. My only chance, really. I started to climb, but it wasn't the quiet, graceful sneaking I'd been doing before. I hadn't been climbing silently like the stairs. I made it up 2 shelves before I knocked an old Transformer toy off and it fell with a plastic clack. Another time, another place, that noise wouldn't have mattered. But to me and that thing outside, it might as well have been a gunshot. As soon as the monster disappeared, it came roaring back into my room. I kept climbing, but my arms were shaky, and I almost lost my grip. I didn't look back. I reached the top, opened the hatch, and pulled myself through just in time to hear the closet door fly off its hinges. I couldn't stop myself from turning back for a second, and that thing was right there, grinning at me. It saw me. It knew where I was. There was nowhere to hide now. Only running. This time, I really did lose control of my bladder. When one of its clawed hands grabbed the hatch, I realized I had to keep going. Keep running. Keep moving. I didn't know my way around the attic, but that didn't matter. I had to keep going. I had to put any distance between me and it. But the way wasn't very clear. My family, like most families, had stuffed lots of old junk into the attic. At first, when I turned and saw all the piles of boxes, I almost panicked because it was such a small and confusing maze. But then I had to get on my hands and knees to crawl through the only way forward, and I hoped it meant that thing couldn't follow. That hope pushed me forward, but I was only halfway through the tunnel of old plastic and cardboard when the strong smell of rotting meat made me realize that thing was closer than I wanted to imagine. Then, what little light there was disappeared, and something grabbed my ankle. I screamed. This was the moment I was supposed to wake up. This was the moment something was supposed to stop the fear. I pulled on the boxes around me, and they came tumbling down, spilling old furniture and pictures, and I grabbed them too, hoping I could use them to get away. But this thing was big, and it pulled me out like a hunter pulls a rabbit from its hole. It briefly held me upside down and looked at me. I stared into black, sunken eyes and a skinny face covered in sores and bumps. With a smirk, it grabbed something from over its shoulder, put it on the floor, and before I even knew what was happening, it stuffed me into a sack and threw me over its shoulder. The world became a blur. I felt my mind closing in on itself, and the world narrowed to a point. I fought to stop my thoughts from racing with images of what might happen to me. Being dragged to its home where its disgusting mouth would open wide and swallow me whole. Being killed or cut up or tortured. I don't know if you can really imagine what it was like for me, as a kid, to curl up in that dark space and think about my own death. To face my death or worse. But it broke me. It completely and totally broke me. I'm broken because of it. Because of that moment. So much so that when it dropped me down with a heavy thump on the fireplace mantel, I didn't even move or try to get away. I already knew where it was taking me. Up the chimney. Where else? And it was too late. I'd lost the fight. If anything, at that point, I wanted it to be over. I wanted to be with Mom and Dad. Instead, the moment just dragged on. Seconds turned into minutes, and I waited with bated breath for the nightmare to move on. But it didn't happen. It must have been getting ready for something, but what? And for how long? Finally, I opened my eyes. Thin light came through the rough fabric of the sack, enough for me to see the vague shape of the destroyed living room. But the opening of the sack had fallen a little, and I could see a little hole where the string that tied it together wasn't quite tight enough. And there, like a weird reminder, was a broken orange pencil. A tiny piece of my trap. One night, one sleep, that was all that separated me from this nightmare. Just the day before, we were happy, or at least close to it. And I remembered that this thing had not only taken me, but also my mother, my father, and even Alex, whom I knew only through old memories and a room my mom didn't want me in. And there was a good chance it was going to get my sister too. Everything was gone, leaving an empty house with broken things that no one would care about. Not the Christmas tree, the presents, nothing. I felt something rise up inside me. Anger, a childish, angry tantrum. I was screwed anyway, right? I lost everything, so, why not? I reached out, grabbed the pencil, and poked my head out of the sack. I saw that thing enter the room with my sister held by the ankle in one of its twisted fists. She was crying really loud, and I hoped that with this final act, I could somehow save her. I crawled out of the bag, lunged at it, and stabbed the broken pencil into its boot. Immediately, it dropped my sister, and I stayed where I was on the floor, sobbing with my head down, waiting for whatever was coming next. But nothing happened. Instead, that thing sighed. A deep, bone-tired sigh. The kind a parent makes when they realize their toddler has been quiet for too long. With a voice like gravel, it spoke with a rough German accent, spitting some of the words out of its broken teeth. So close, this year. Good trap, little one, but I will not fall for this one twice. It pulled the pencil out of its foot with one of its clawed hands and stomped away. I passed out before I could hear the rest. It was our grandfather who finally found us, huddled together on the living room floor. The next month or so was a blur. Lots of things changed. We were taken in by Grandpa. We had to bury our parents. And we had to move out and clean up the house. We didn't help much, of course. We were kids, but we still had to go back and get some of our things. I don't really remember much of it, to be honest. Years later, Grandpa sat me down and told me what he remembered about that night. My dad's piston trap went wrong and blew up half the living room. Bad luck any other day, but this time, it happened the year that thing came to visit. And since there were no more traps, it had a clear path into the house where it made a mess. It only has to nick you, Grandpa said with a stoic shrug, gesturing to a cut on his palm. Your father made things too complicated. I told him this after he almost started a fire. Too much. The trap has to work in principle. It doesn't have to be fancy. No need for compressors or pistons. That's why your pencil, yaw, sent it away. You made a trap. It hurt the monster. It went away. Those are the rules. We follow the rules. We give it a chimney to climb down. We play its game. We win or it wins. Either way, it gets its fun. He spat out the last word. I couldn't blame him, none of that was fun for us. But at least Grandpa was honest with us. He explained the curse as best he could. The rules, the traps. He introduced us to our extended family in Germany, and we learned that the game is played with at least one family from the family every year. It helps to stay in touch and talk about what worked or, God forbid, did not work. As for the curse's origin, well, our grandma took that to her grave. Grandpa didn't know, no one else did. Maybe it was something from her childhood. Maybe she made a deal with something in the woods. Who knows, it doesn't matter. He was a grumpy old guy, and he raised us as best he could. I could at least understand why he was so mean. He fell in love with a woman, got her pregnant before Christmas, and had no idea what was coming. And then, when he found out the crazy truth, he stuck with it year after year, one painful loss after another. I respect him for that. I admired how he didn't let anything get to him, at least not in front of us. Because I do remember some things about waking up that day. About Grandpa finding us. I remember the monster, having lost its game, returned our parents to us. It was just too late for them. I remember wet sacks under the chimney. Blood leaking from the fabric. My parents were cremated for a good reason. Whatever it did to them, well, that thing is a sick and twisted creature, that's for sure. I can only assume that's why, after returning the sacks, it put little tags on them and tied them at the top, giving our parents back to us, even though it had killed them until only pieces were left. Merry Christmas, little ones. The tag said, and so many more to come.